What's going on, everybody? It's Nick. Been a long time. In this video, I'm going to be showing you a cold outreach system build from start to finish. This is one of probably the most effective cold outreach systems that anybody's building in the world, not to toot my own horn, but it's extremely, extremely powerful. I've personally achieved anywhere from 15 to 25% reply rates with this, and basically every company that I introduce this into uses it as their sole sales method moving forward. So super effective stuff. I'm going to show you everything from like the scoping at the very beginning, all the way to, translating that into sort of a workflow and, what my mindset and design choices are. So hopefully you guys can pick that knowledge up and then use it to build your own systems later on. If that sounds like something you guys are into, buckle up and let's get into the video. Okay, so first things first, anytime you're dealing with a project like this, you obviously need to convert what the client wants, which, in my case is somebody that I'm building a system for, into what is feasible and what is realistic. A lot of the time a client will want something and then they will make it out to be 400 steps when really that only takes one step. And the inverse applies a lot of the time as well, where they'll say something like, oh, that's super easy, right? You just send it from here to here. And then turns out that is like a waterfall of 500 different triggers and actions. Luckily in this case, it seems pretty straightforward. So this is just a message that I received when I was asking for a little bit of clarification, and honestly, I read through it. It's more than sufficient. You can actually turn something like this into a very high ROI system. And in my case, because I'm combining it with the email know-how that I have and the fact that I've introduced these systems into 7 and even 8-figure businesses at this point, I know that this system is going to crush it. So let's go through this scope, essentially. Hey mate, thinking a Google folder I can drop a big list of leads into. Most likely LinkedIn Sales Navigator to Phantom Buster. So he's referencing a lead sourcing method that I have shown in a previous video, which I'll touch on in a second. And then I'll also leave a link down in the description if you guys are looking for leads yourselves. A very straightforward method. You can export up to, I think, 2.5 to 3K a day. And I use it for, most of my businesses and the businesses that I partner with. But anyway, then the system will automatically find their emails, which is important. It'll automatically do AI personalization, which is something that I'll touch on, but it's extremely powerful if you do it at scale. And then from there, the lead will go into instantly as usual. It's important that the only manual step that anyone has to do is drag and drop the lead list into the folder. Everything else should be automatic. So the reason why, first of all, that I chose this system to sort of talk about today is because I think this is more or less the perfect marriage of like human effort and then like leveraging automatic processes. Because if you think about it, you could extend the system and then you could also have it do the lead sourcing automatically. But the lead sourcing, at least from my experience, I know there's just so many little tweaks and quirks and sort of like finicky bits that if you do automate it, it's usually not really worth the sunk time, energy, and cost into building like this extremely inflexible pipeline to source leads. It's almost always better to just pay a virtual assistant or somebody in like a lower cost of living area, $10, maybe $15 an hour to just go and do the lead sourcing mechanism, which in our case probably would take like an hour or something for 2,500 leads. Mathematically, it just makes a lot more sense than trying to build a system to do everything. And so the reason why I'm bringing this up is because, a lot of novice automation engineers and people attempting to implement these sorts of flows in their own businesses, they think, I want to automate everything. And, kudos to you. I thought that a lot myself. But what I've found is, there are things that it makes sense to automate. And then there's some things that, a little bit of human supervision, just because the flexibility of people and the fact that, you can like open a new tab and, AI can't really do that yet, just makes it a lot more cost effective to get up and running with people first. After you validated the system, maybe, 6 months to a year out, and, if you really want to cut on the $15 per 2,500 leads that you're sourcing, then maybe you can, build a system out. But you have more than enough capability to make a boatload of money by just building AI systems in sort of these modular steps as opposed to owning the entire space. So anywho, that's my big rant. But I learned it from experience and hopefully it's valuable to you. What essentially this person is going to do behind the scenes is they just have a team of virtual assistants, and their jobs are essentially they'll have LinkedIn profiles, and then they use Phantom Busters to source lists. And the way that these lists look is they look just like this. And this is just an example list that I sourced for, I think like Web3 marketing agencies or something. All I did for this was I went to LinkedIn Sales Navigator. You do need to have a LinkedIn Sales Navigator account, of course. And then I did a LinkedIn Sales Navigator search, and then I took the URL of that search and then I put it into Phantom Buster. I waited about 10 or 15 minutes, and then this is the result. I have a massive list of 2,500. It says 2,501, but that's because these rows are one indexed. Literally 2,500 leads here. And you can see, we have a ton of information on them. We have their first name, we have their last name, combined we have their full name. You'll see that there's a little bit of processing that these leads need to have. This guy's name probably is an Anthony Day clock emoji. It's probably just Anthony Day. So, that's worth taking a look at. We're obviously gonna have to fix that when we build out our system. But we have everything else that we need in order to, do email enrichment. We have the company name, we have the title, right? We have the company ID, company URL. We have a bunch of stuff for AI personalization here. We have a summary column, right? This is more than enough to do some really, really good work. And, as I mentioned earlier, this list might realistically cost you a cost of goods of maybe $10 or $15 if you just get somebody to click a couple buttons for you. Very straightforward. Essentially, these virtual assistants will then take this list, and then I would imagine they're just going to have it as a Google, they're just gonna have it as a Google sheet, and then in Google Drive, they're just gonna drag and drop this folder this Google spreadsheet, I should say, into a folder, and then that'll be the trigger to the flow. So that's sort of the high level scope. You'll see that I wrote a couple of notes down here, and this is just super simple. I'm not even gonna do a flow chart for this system. The craziest thing is this system is so high ROI, you could probably charge over $10,000 for it. And I'll probably be able to build out most of the bones of it in 20 minutes. So yeah, very straightforward sort of stuff. But, it's sort of like that old plumber analogy where, the plumber comes over and then he looks at the pipe and then he grabs his hammer and just goes knock once. And, he's like, that'll be $500. And then the person's like, what the hell? Why would I pay $500 to do a knock? And it's like, well, you're not paying me $500 to do the knock. You're paying me $500 for all of the time, energy, and experience I've built to get to the point where all I need to do is a knock. So yeah, that's more or less where we are here. But anyway, we know that we're going to watch a Google Drive folder module. That's going to be step one. Then we're going to grab every row in this Google Sheet, and then we're going to send it to an email verification or validation tool. We can use a platform called any email finder for that. Then if the email exists, I'm going to send every record to OpenAI to basically personalize the email. And this is how I achieve open rates of 15 to 20 to 25%. Reply rates, not open rates. Yeah, we actually get replies of basically 1 in 4 emails that we send out, 1 in 5 gets a response now, which is pretty sick. And then the last step is if the email exists, we're also going to send it to instantly via the API. So yeah, a couple of cool steps here, but that's more or less what the system looks like. If you're unfamiliar with any of these platforms, just the brief rundown. Obviously, Make is the system that we're going to be using to build out the automations. It's like the glue that holds everything together. The email validation tool that I'm going to be using is called Any Mail Finder, and I'll touch on that when I actually go through the build. And then the cold email platform I'm using is called Instantly, and it's just the, most cost-effective cold email platform out there. I just copy and pasted a campaign that I've used for other people that seems to work quite well. And I'm just going to use this as sort of my example. So I'll get the system 99% of the way there, and then I'll just change the campaign that I'm sending to from my account over to my friend's account. Okay, great. So that is it. Without further ado, let's get into the building. So very first thing I need to do is I need to set up a Google Drive folder, and then I need to basically watch that Google Drive folder. So what I'm going to do is go to drive.google.com. And then I know that I'm not going to do this on my account. I'm going to do this on this account. And then I should have an example build folder here. Yeah, there we go. Okay, great. Yeah, and I set this up already. So for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to delete this. But anyway, inside of this example builds folder, I'm just going to pretend that I have a folder here for, let's just call him example client to preserve his confidentiality. And then this is going to be the folder that I'm going to watch. And essentially, the whole job of this system is anytime a Google Sheet gets dropped into this, that's when we're going to trigger the flow. That's when we're going to do all that fun stuff. So first things first, I'm going to go over here to New Scenario. Then I'll just go to Drive. I know Make had some changes to their UI recently. It's a little sexier, but to be honest, I don't really think it helps. Then we're going to click Watch Files in a folder, Watch Files by created time. We'll choose a drive. The folder to be watched, we'll do example build. So we'll do that. And then I'm going to do example client. And then here's a really cool thing that you can do. You can select the file type to watch. So we're only going to select the Google spreadsheet, and we're just going to do a limit of 1. Now I'm going to run this. Nothing's going to happen here because we haven't actually dragged and dropped anything in yet. But what I'm going to do is I'll go lead list here. And then I'm just going to make a copy of this so that I still have that other lead list. And then I'm going to go back here. And then Google Drive's really annoying sometimes. I'm just going to search it here. And then I should be able to move this. Yeah, I can't move this one because this is the one on my other account. Okay, so this is the one. And then I'm going to move this over to the example client folder. So we're going to move that in. This is now in the example client folder, which we'll just go back to here. You see that we have the lead list in, and now that we have that, we can basically run this again and then test it. So run. Great. We'll see that we now received the file. If we scroll down here, the name of this file is lead list. So just confirming that, we have what we want. If we wanted to confirm further, we could copy the web view link here, open a new tab and paste it in. And then you'll see we go right back to that same lead list that we had before. So that's great. But the question is, now that we have, the file that has been found, essentially, now that we've watched it and we've received a link, what do we do with this information? Well, now we basically want to, for every row in this lead list of 2,500 leads without email addresses, we want to take every row and then we want to basically enrich it. We want to send it over to our email enrichment service, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back over to Make. And then in Google Sheets, there is a module called Search a Sheet. Or Search Rows, I should say. And search rows, you can use this to search, obviously, and then you can put your own filters and parameters and queries in the search field. But you can also just use this to list everything. Like if you don't include any of that information, it'll just list every single row in your sheet. And so this is just a very quick hack to iterate over everything. So in order to do this, I'm just going to test this. I'm going to go watch files in a folder. I'm going to go back to my other Google Drive run, and then I'm going to scroll down to find the file ID of this big Google sheet. And then this way I can just hard code the sheet in. So I'm not actually going to go through this whole selection thing just because that takes a few extra seconds and can be a little bit laggy sometimes. And then I'm just going to hard code all the info. So the spreadsheet that I'm looking for is the lead list, which has an ID of what I just pasted in. The sheet name is just going to be sheet 1. If you go to Google Sheets, this down here is technically the sheet name. So I'm just going to paste that in there. A table does contain headers. Headers are just the very first row here, like profile URL, full name, first name, all that stuff. Column range, I just leave it as default. Filter, I'm not going to do any. And then down here is what I was mentioning, maximum number of returned rows. We're just going to set that to 1 to only select the first row, just as a sort of example. And then we're not going to run this again entirely. We're just going to run the module that we're interested in, which is this Google Sheets Search Rows module, just to double check that, if we fed it that input as the file ID, that it could go through and then it could retrieve the information that we want. And it did. So we have the profile URL of this presumably handsome fellow called Jamie Burke. And we get the summary, we get the title description, we get all the information that we're probably going to need in order to do the email enrichment, which is pretty nice. You notice back here, I selected maximum number of return rows and I set that to 1. I just did that because I didn't want to run it like 5 million times. But hypothetically, let's say I set it to 5. Oh, sorry, I think I ran the entire scenario. Let's just run this. So if I set that to 5, what you'll see is we're actually going to retrieve 5 different bundles. And so basically what we've done is if I go back to this Google Sheet, we've just gone through the first 5 entries here. So from 2 to 6. And bundle 1 is Jamie, bundle 2 is this fellow Christopher, bundle 3 is Anthony, so on and so on and so forth. The reason why that's important is because every time you generate a new bundle in Make, you basically have like a built-in iterator. And so any branch that I create after this module will just run every time anew per bundle. And so you can use the variables in every individual bundle, like the first name of the person from Jamie to Anthony to Christopher, whatever. You can use their company name or whatever in the rest of your flow. And you can just do it without having to muck around with iterators and all that stuff. So pretty straightforward. We have a variety of bundles down here. And you can imagine how when we run this kind of fully, we'll have 2,500 bundles. I should slap a giant warning label on here. This sort of flow, probably not super ops friendly. You'll probably have to spend, I don't know, every time you run it, you'll probably have to spend a few operations, maybe like $5 or $10 worth. But if you consider the relative upside for a company that's, emailing 2,500 new people a day, it obviously pans out, right? I mean, this is a high ticket sale sort of service where, you can make anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000 in a closed deal. And with a reply rate of 20-ish%, which is what I'd imagine for this campaign, the numbers just start to be absolutely ridiculous. So, the total cost of running these ops is probably like 0.01% of the infrastructure cost on the marketing side of things, virtually zero. But anyway, so yeah, we have the Google Sheets now. Let me just jump back to this click up here and see what else I wrote. Yeah, so I just wrote watch Google Drive folder module and then send to email verification or validation tool. Awesome. So that's our next step. What we have to do is, depending on the email validation or enrichment platform that you're using, I'm going to be using one called Any Mail Finder, which is a free trial, I believe, for 3 or 4 days or something. But I'm just using it because the client is using it, and it's also very easy to use sort of under the hood with the API. But you can imagine how I'm building the system very modularly. So any enrichment platform that you use that has an API that will allow you to enrich people via API, you can just hot swap in here. I'm not married to any individual platform. So, I mean, I've built a very similar system before, probably like 15 or 20 times now. So, that's why I'm confident enough that most platforms will work. But, if you don't believe me, just try and figure out your own platform. Instead of Any Mail Finder, try using Drop Contact or something else, and you'll see what I mean. Okay, so because I'm going to be interacting with their API and they don't have a built-in module, at least I don't think so. Yeah, they don't have a built-in module here. We're going to have to interact via their API, so I'm using the HTTP make a request module. And then I'm going to Any Mail Finder right over here, which is the service that we're going to be using to find verified emails. And then I'm going to click on the API. So I'm then going to read the documentation. And the really interesting thing about a lot of APIs is, like, they're written by very technical people, and God bless technical people, but 99% of it is just BS, and you don't really need to know anything about it. So I'm going to give you a little hack next time you use an API or are looking for some API documentation solution. The only 2 things that you really need are, 1, you need authentication, so you need to figure out how you authenticate with the API. And then 2, you need to figure out the specific endpoint that you're interested in, which in my case, I already know is just going to be whatever enriches an email. Right, APIs usually have like a bunch of endpoints, and not all of them are super relevant. Some of them are just status checks, for instance. I don't really care about the status check. I'm just going to assume that it's up a lot. But yeah, so, first and foremost, the major thing that I'm looking for is just the authentication. So I'm just going to type auth, and then voila. You see, it's like one of the first things that we talk about, which is quite nice. And then it says, all requests except the get status endpoint require authentication. To authenticate, you need to set an authorization header with the API key you can find in your settings as value. I think it's a spelling mistake, but I'm just going to open up the settings thing in a new tab. I'll go back here, and you can see that, I signed up for a trial, I think yesterday, so I have my API key here. So I'm just going to copy that API key because I imagine I'm going to need it later. And then it says, for example, if your API key is secret_key_123, you will want to add an authorization header with value bearer secret_key_123. Okay, so this is sort of a nuance in API integrations, but this is authorizing using like an authorization bearer scheme. I believe that's what it's called anyway. And all that means is if you go back to this scenario over here, first things first, we're just going to leave this URL empty. And then, I don't know why this is so ugly here. There we go. I'm just going to go to header, and then for the name, you're just always going to write authorization, and the value is always going to be bearer plus the API key. So in my case, I'm just going to hard code this API key, which came directly from my service. Immediately after this video, I'm going to rotate it. So if we have any young enterprising individuals that want to try and run me a big credit card bill, you're shit out of luck. But you should not be exposing your API key, unless you're doing like a tutorial like this and you're confident that's not a big deal. So just keep that in mind. But anyway, so yeah, that's basically how we authorize and authenticate, which is very straightforward. So we got the authorization header down. Probably 70% of APIs will use this format. Some APIs will do it differently, but yeah, authorization bearer scheme is very straightforward. So that's the first kind of requirement that we fulfilled, which is obviously getting authenticated. I still haven't tested that, which I'll show you in a second. But the second thing is we obviously just need to find whatever API endpoint that we care about, which in our case is getting a verified email. And so in this case, it's pretty simple and straightforward. Basically, every row on this table of contents is just another endpoint. And so the one that we obviously want to search for an email, we just want one email. And then what I really like about this API documentation, actually, and I really usually do not like API documentations because a lot of them are really shitty, pardon my French, but It'll tell you the method, which in our case is post. It'll then give you the whole URL, and then it'll also give you an example of a query, which is great. So this says post. Post is just a method that we can use to call the API. And you need to use the method that they specify. It's just sort of like programming, not nomenclature, but it just has to do with database querying and sort of the ways that older databases are set up. So we're doing a post request essentially to this URL here. So I'm just going to copy this URL. And then I'm just going to scroll down here. A little hack, like 99% of the time, you're just going to want to choose body type raw, content type application JSON. And then for the request content, this is where you paste in whatever the format is of the, basically like the JavaScript object that you're using. So when I paste this in, I get this, domain hundo.io, full name Joe Delia. I guess that's their example. So what I'm going to do, just for the purposes of this demonstration, is I'm going to pipe in my own domain. I'll pipe in my own name. And then under parse response, I'll click yes. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to run this as a test for my authentication. And then I'm also going to test the API endpoint. So we just got a 200 status code back, which is great. We're going to go to data. Success is set to true. That's nice. So they have a success variable that we can very quickly and easily use to check the results. It looks like there's an input collection. So that just shows us what we supplied, which is also honestly extremely useful. This API is fantastic. And then results, we have an email, nick@leftclick.ai. That is actually my email. Fantastic. And then alternatives, empty. So that's fantastic. We basically just put in, all we did is we put in my name, Nick Sarive, and then we put in the domain that I work at, leftclick.ai. And then I got my email address, right? What are the odds of that? Incredible. With great power comes great responsibility. You can't get everybody's email like this, I will say, but you can get a lot of people's emails like this. Because most people's emails follow a format like first name at domain, or first name dot first letter of last name dot whatever at website, right? So they sort of like just permute these, and they just sort of like try various iterations of this until one works. And I think they just do some type of like, they ping the mail server to verify that that email is alive or whatnot. But anyway, that's great. So what do we have to do now? If you think about it logically, well, actually, let me just double check. Do we even have the domain? We may not actually have the domain. Yeah, I think I tried doing this a while ago, and because we didn't have the domain, we couldn't do it that simply. Yeah, so no domain, I believe, but that's okay. I think this API endpoint will also allow us to do this through company name, right? Yes, okay, great. So we don't actually need the domain. We can also just use the company name. I imagine the company name is probably a little less likely to get verified. But yeah, I think, I've run tests on this before, and I think the company name is like success rates are like 55, 60%. Domain name is like 70%. So you are going to lose 10 or 15%. Let's see. Yeah, we couldn't find any emails of this domain. That's unfortunate. Wait a second, domain. I put in company name, didn't I? Yeah, I did. Weird. But that's okay. There are tons of situations in which you will just give a company name and then it will work. I mean, if I send anybody else in this list, like this fellow over here, and then I slap his company name in there. Oops. Give myself a 30% chance that this works. Yeah, okay, so success for that was true. I'm not going to show the email just because it's not my own, but yeah. So it looks like company name works reasonably well. And when I tried this with drop contact, it was about a 60% validation rate. So you can imagine you feed 2,500 emails in, you're